weight of regret.
The rain started about 10 minutes into the drive, drumming against the windshield like an accusation. The wipers dragged back and forth in tired metronomic strokes, their squeaks threading through the suffocating silence between us. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, the edge of my nails biting into my palms. The tension in the car was like a living thing, heavy and oppressive, coiled tight around my throat.
So you're just not going to say anything?
My voice cracked as it cut through the sound of the rain, sharper than I'd intended. Matt shifted in his seat, his side dragging over my nerves like sandpaper.
What do you want me to say? I've already explained myself. I was just talking to her.
Talking?
I let out a brittle laugh.
Is that what you call leaning in, laughing like she's the funniest person you've ever met? Touching her arm.
My voice faltered, and I hated the way it trembled. He ran a hand through his hair, his movements measured, too calm.
She's your coworker. I was being polite.
Polite.
I echoed, the word tasting bitter in my mouth.
Right. Because polite looks exactly like flirting.
Matt's jaw tightened.
You're seeing things that aren't there. I wasn't flirting.
Don't gaslight me.
The words flew out before I could stop them, a knee-jerk defense. I turned my gaze back to the wet road ahead, the lights of oncoming cars smearing into fractured halos through the rain. His voice dropped, low and strained.
You always do this.
Do what?
Turn nothing into something. Look, Nicole, you're upset because you're insecure, not because I did anything wrong.
That hit like a slap. I felt my grip on the wheel falter for just a second, my focus blurring with the sting of his words.
I hate you.
The words tumbled out, small and quiet, but they echoed in the space between us like a scream. Matt turned to me, his expression unreadable.
What did you say?
But before I could answer, the road seemed to shift beneath us. A sharp curve loomed out of nowhere, obscured by the rain and the fog of my anger. I yanked the wheel too hard, the tires losing purchase on the slick asphalt.
Nicole.
His voice was the last thing I heard before the world exploded into chaos, metal twisting, glass shattering, and the crushing weight of darkness. When I opened my eyes, the world was a blur of white fluorescent lights, sterile walls, and the sharp smell of antiseptic. Pain coursed through my body, every breath an effort.
Nicole.
The sound of his voice made my heart leap. I turned my head, wincing at the sharp stab of pain in my neck. Matt sat beside me, his face pale but whole. His legs were covered with a thin hospital blanket, and he was slouched slightly in a wheelchair.
You're okay.
I croaked, tears pricking at my eyes.
Oh my God, Matt, you're okay.
He gave me a small, tired smile.
We're okay,
he said, his voice steady and calm.
That's all that matters.
But it wasn't. 2 weeks later, we were having lunch at my parents' house. Matt's parents were there too, the 6 of us crammed around the dining room table, like some kind of twisted family reunion. The air was heavy, the kind of silence that begged to be filled, but no one dared to break. I poked at my food, trying to ignore the weight of their stares. Across the table, Matt sat with his hands folded neatly in his lap, his posture unusually rigid. My father cleared his throat, a sharp and uncomfortable sound, his gaze darting toward me for the briefest moment before dropping back to his plate. My mother busied herself with refilling glasses, her movements careful and deliberate, like she was trying to avoid brushing against the thick tension in the room. Matt's mother glanced at me from time to time, her eyes heavy with something I couldn't quite name, sadness maybe, or judgment. I shifted in my seat, trying to ignore the way Matt's father seemed to avoid looking at me altogether. The clinking of cutlery and the scrape of chairs against the floor felt deafening in the silence, each sound magnifying the weight in the room.
So,
I said finally, my voice too loud in the oppressive quiet.
How's work been?
The words came out awkward, hollow, like they didn't belong here. My father blinked, startled, as if I'd said something offensive.
Fine.
He replied curtly, his tone clipped. His eyes flicked briefly in Matt's parents' direction, just for a fraction of a second, before he reached for his glass and took a long sip of water.
That's good,
I said, forcing a smile. I turned to Matt, hoping he'd pick up the conversation. He smiled back at me, faint and distant. No one else spoke. Matt's mother shifted uncomfortably, her fork hovering over her plate like she couldn't decide whether to take another bite or set it down entirely. She glanced toward my mother, who gave a small shake of her head, her expression unreadable. The silence pressed down on me like a weight. I gripped my fork tightly, my fingers trembling.
Can we talk about something else?
I blurted, forcing a laugh that sounded too brittle.
It's like a funeral in here.
Matt chuckled softly, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade. But no one else joined in. My father shifted again, his jaw tight. My mother gave me a look, part disbelief, part concern, but said nothing. I turned to Matt, desperate for something to break the tension.
Hey, remember that time we got lost on our way to that concert? You swore you knew the shortcut, and we ended up in that creepy abandoned gas station?
He smiled, his face lighting up with the memory.
How could I forget? You wouldn't stop teasing me for weeks.
I mean, come on.
I said, laughing.
Who gets lost with GPS?
My mother's fork clattered against her plate.
Nicole,
She said softly, her voice trembling.
What?
I asked, frowning. She didn't respond. No one did. The silence was louder than anything I'd ever heard. The weeks dragged on, and recovery took its toll. Matt was always there, helping me when I couldn't manage on my own. At first, I was grateful. Then, I wasn't. It started with little things. I'd catch him watching me too closely as I struggled to put on a sweater or limp my way across the room. His presence, once comforting, began to feel stifling.
Can you not hover?
I snapped one afternoon, fumbling with a cup of tea that spilled over the counter. He rolled forward in his wheelchair, his voice calm as always.
I'm just trying to help.
Well, maybe I don't need your help.
I muttered, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. His silence should have been a relief, but it wasn't. He just sat there, his expression unreadable, before wheeling himself out of the kitchen. That night, as we ate dinner, I couldn't take it anymore. The sound of his fork scraping against the plate was like nails on a chalkboard. Each scrape seemed to echo my guilt back at me, louder and louder until I snapped.
You're not some kind of saint, you know.
I said, pushing my plate away with more force than necessary. He paused mid-bite, then set his fork down carefully, meeting my gaze evenly.
What's that supposed to mean?
His tone was calm, but there was an edge to it that made my stomach tighten.
It means you don't get to sit there all high and mighty, pretending you're okay with everything.
I shot back, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound firm.
I'm not pretending.
He said quietly, his words deliberate.
But you seem to be.
The words hit harder than they should have. I felt the heat rise in my face as I struggled to hold his gaze.
I'm not the one who's constantly pointing out how much I screwed up.
I haven't said a word about the accident.
He replied, his voice tight with restraint, though his eyes blazed with an unspoken accusation.
You're the one who brings it up every time you look at me.
I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor with a grating screech.
You're unbelievable. I'm trying to move on, but you...
Move on?
His voice was sharp now, cutting through the tension like a blade. He gestured to the wheelchair, his movements sudden and jerky.
You think you can just move on? You think I can? Look at me, Nicole. Do you think this just goes away?
The weight of his words crashed over me, leaving me momentarily stunned. My mouth opened to respond, but nothing came out. Instead, I stared at the floor, the knot of guilt in my chest tightening until it felt like I couldn't breathe.
Say something.
He pressed, his voice softer now, but no less cutting.
Tell me how this doesn't affect you every single day. Tell me how you don't see it, feel it.
I didn't mean for any of this to happen.
I whispered, my voice barely audible.
Neither did I.
He replied bitterly, his gaze hard. Days turned into weeks, and the fights only escalated. It was as if we were locked in a cycle, each argument digging the wound deeper. One night, after yet another pointless spat about nothing, dirty dishes, misplaced keys, something insignificant, I finally snapped.
You know what? I hate you.
I spat, the words venomous and bitter. The second they left my mouth, I wished I could take them back, but they hung there, heavy and irreversible. He froze, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white.
What did you say?
I hate you.
I repeated, quieter this time, my voice trembling under the weight of my own anger. His expression shifted, hurt, anger, and something deeper, something I didn't want to name.
You hated me that night too, didn't you?
He asked, his voice low and steady.
You hated me when you said it before the crash.
My stomach dropped. I turned away, unable to meet his gaze. The walls seemed to close in on me, the room suffocating in its silence.
That's not fair.
I murmured, but the words sounded weak, even to me.
It's the truth.
He said flatly. His voice didn't rise, but it carried the weight of every unspoken accusation, every regret.
You didn't mean to say it then, and you don't mean to say it now. But it doesn't matter, does it? Once it's out, it's there.
I heard the wheels of his chair creak as he moved toward the door.
You can't keep running from this, Nicole.
He said before disappearing down the hallway. The silence he left behind was unbearable. I clenched my fists, trying to suppress the guilt rising like bile in my throat. I didn't mean to snap. I told myself I didn't, but his constant presence, his unspoken judgment, was suffocating. I dropped into a chair, burying my face in my hands. The words replayed in my mind over and over, each repetition another nail in the coffin of whatever was left between us. The sound of the wheels faded into the hallway, leaving a silence that felt heavier than his presence. I clenched my fists, trying to push down the guilt that rose like bile in my throat. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The dim glow of the streetlight outside filtered through the curtains, casting fractured shadows across the room. I could hear the faint creak of the house settling, the soft hum of the refrigerator, and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. But something felt wrong. I turned my head toward the doorway, half expecting to see him there, watching me like he had so many nights before. It was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone.
Matt?
I whispered into the dark. The sound of his name hung in the air, unanswered. I squeezed my eyes shut and rolled onto my side, telling myself I was imagining things. The exhaustion was getting to me, that was all. But just as sleep began to pull me under, I heard it.
Nicole.
His voice. My eyes snapped open, my heart hammering against my ribs. I bolted upright, scanning the room.
Matt?
The chair in the corner of the room where he usually sat was strangely absent. The silence was deafening. I climbed out of bed, ignoring the sharp protest of my healing body. My footsteps were cautious, almost hesitant, as I made my way to the living room. The house was dark and still, the kind of stillness that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe.
Matt?
I called again, louder this time. No answer. I turned on the light, my pulse racing. The room was empty. His wheelchair was gone. My legs buckled, and I sank to the floor, the memory slamming into me like a tidal wave. The crash, the rain, his scream. I saw his body crumpled in the wreckage, the life already drained from his eyes. My chest tightened as the truth clawed its way to the surface, undeniable and cruel. Matt wasn't here. He hadn't been here. He was dead. And I was alone.
Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us here at the Haunt Vault. Weight of Regret reminds us that some ghosts aren't bound by the grave. They live in the choices we can't undo. If this tale lingers in your mind, whisper your thoughts in the comments. But be warned, some truths are best left unspoken. Like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to uncover more chilling stories that dwell in the shadows. The vault holds many secrets, and the deeper you go, the harder it is to find your way back. Until next time, remember, the past always finds a way to haunt you.